Before she was Miss Jackson, if you're nasty, she was the smallest Jackson on the biggest stage. First in the family's Las Vegas review, then as Penny on Good Times. A kid who stared down pain and kept her poise. TV taught her timing. Life taught her stakes. Then came a studio 1,900 miles from Encino. A fingertip hit a Lynn drum in Minneapolis. And the air tightened, with Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. She did what pop almost never lets young women do. Took the pen. Control wasn't a makeover. It was a manifesto. Title card in sound, not ink. I, me, my rules. The imagery followed the thesis. Paula Abdul counted off the angles. A visor flashed 1814. Boots struck concrete in unison. A braider threaded box braids under a newsboy cap. A melody labeled again. Glowed on staff paper. A closed mic breath found a bass line. Arena lights bloomed, then snapped to black. From a drill team that danced like policy to a film that whispered like a diary to an album that turned healing into choreography. This isn't a story about scandal or even just success. A headline flared and vanished. The takeaway didn't. Authorship. A black woman designed her sound, her image, her terms, and made the industry learn her language. Together again became communion, grief that moves, joy that argues, beats that build a nation. The receipts stack like frames, contracts flipping, a Grammy. Catching light in a visor, a rehearsal mirror scrawled. I, me, my rules. A tour laminate stamped state of the world. Offstage, a child's hand finding hers. Janet Demita Jo Jackson didn't just survive pop. She architected it and invited us to live inside. Janet, the right to speak. How the youngest Jackson learned to use her voice, and how the world learned to listen.
Hi! What's your name?
Janet?
The youngest Jackson, learning to speak in her own voice. Las Vegas Review. Good Times, Flyte Tyme, Control. The mythology starts with the surname. The Jacksons weren't just famous, they were American royalty. And the youngest, Janet Demita Jo Jackson, stepped into the lights early. First as a tiny performer in the family's Las Vegas Review, then as a working child actor. At 11, she became Penny on Good Times, the bruised but unbroken kid taken in by the neighbors. For a nation that already knew the Jackson name, here was another one with presence to spare. Camera smart, emotionally precise, funny. TV taught her timing and restraint. It taught the rest of us that Janet wasn't a shadow. She was a frame filler. Music, famously, wasn't the original plan. Janet has said she wanted college, maybe business law. Acting was the lane that made sense to her. But the family machine tugged harder. Under her father Joe's management, 2 modest A&M albums, Janet Jackson, 1982, and Dream Street, 1984, put her on radio without yet putting her in charge. A teenage elopement with James DeBarge made headlines. The quick annulment made more. The noise got louder. Her point of view didn't. Not yet. The microphone that finally fit her hand was 1,900 miles from Encino, in a Minneapolis studio called Flyte Tyme. Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis weren't just producers. They were architects of a sound, a crisp, mechanized swing born of drum machines and synth bass, with melodies welded to groove. A&M exec John McClain paired Janet with Jam and Lewis after hearing their sleek, forward R&B. The deal came with a condition, recorded on their turf, with their process. Leave the entourage at home. If the third album was going to be called Control, it had to start by giving her some. Jam and Lewis knew reinvention. They'd just broken away from Prince's ecosystem. Famously fired from the Time after a snowed-in detour to produce the SOS Band, and turned that exile into a production empire. Their sonic palette, Lynn and 808 drums, glassy keyboards, negative space you could dance inside, was purpose. Built for a young artist who needed to redraw her silhouette. What happened in that room in the summer and fall of 1985 is the hinge of Janet's story. Control doesn't just sound like a door slamming and a new one opening. It is a document of authorship. First-person grammar set to rubbery funk. I, me, my rules. The album's thesis single, What Have You Done For Me Lately, was the last song written, sharpened to reflect the steel in her voice after a bruising year. When Nasty followed, it came with the unforgettable line, My first name ain't baby. Miss Jackson, if you're nasty. Did you know that only 1% of the people who watch World Stories and documentary are actually subscribed? That means most viewers are exploring history's greatest moments, the rise and fall of empires, and the untold stories of our world, but without staying for what's coming next. Subscribing costs nothing, yet it ensures you never miss the next journey across civilizations, the next forgotten legend, or the next true story that still shapes the present. On this channel, every video is a ticket into the past, crafted to inform, inspire, and sometimes even warn us about the future. If you've ever finished one of our documentaries and felt you learned something new, then subscribing is the smartest way to keep traveling with us. Be part of the 1% who go deeper. Tap subscribe now, and let's explore the world's stories together.
Jackson, if you're nasty.
A clapback born, Janet said, from being harassed by men outside her Minneapolis hotel. Instead of the usual call for protection, she chose confrontation and turned it into art. The engineering matched the stance, crisp, dry drums forward, synths locked to a grid but arranged. With funk's push and pull, vocals stacked like armor. Listen close.
Ha ha hoo hoo, thought you'd get the money too. Greeting, try to have that cake you needed to.
And you can hear how Jam and Lewis, and their longtime engineer Steve Hodge, used space as an instrument, letting gated snares punch while the bass line worked like a heartbeat you could choreograph to. It's the Minneapolis way, machinery with sweat on it. Images mattered, too. Paula Abdul, still known more as a Laker girl turned in-demand choreographer than as a pop star, gave the music its body language. She staged the cafe swagger of "What Have You Done For Me Lately?" and the sharp, shoulder-led precision of "Nasty," moves that turned a sonic thesis into a visual manifesto, and helped MTV understand exactly who Janet Jackson was becoming. The culture got the message immediately. Control hit #1 on the Billboard 200 and started throwing sparks. 5 Hot 100 singles, including When I Think of You, her first US #1. The achievement wasn't just commercial. It recoded what teen-to-adult rebrands could look like for women in pop. The album took a child star narrative and replaced it with a woman's voice claiming authorship over sound, image, and business. In the canon, it's the moment Janet wrests the pen from everyone else's hand and signs her name in bold. But here's the behind-the-scenes truth that powers the myth. Control wasn't a makeover done to her. It was a partnership built for her. McLean's A&R bet, Jam and Lewis's laboratory, Abdul's choreography, Hodge's mixes. None of it lands without Janet's willingness to decamp to Minneapolis, shed the protective casing of the family business, and write in the first person. That studio, no family, no handlers, gave her the psychological room to say the word the album is named for. And once she said it, the industry had to listen. The ripple effects were immediate. Radio and MTV widened their lanes for black women who led with rhythm and point of view. The nasty retort became pop cultural shorthand, and the idea that a former child actor could pivot to adult autonomy without apology, musically, visually, contractually, became a roadmap others would follow. Looking back, you can hear Control as origin story and manifesto. You can also hear a 19-year-old finally allowed to be the author of her own sentences. The youngest Jackson had learned to speak in her own voice, and the world was still catching up to the volume of it. Nation building, Rhythm Nation 1814, long-form visuals, first-wave icon deals. The camera snaps to black and white. Boots hit concrete in unison. A visor flashes 1814. Before a note, you know the assignment. Order, purpose, velocity. 3 years after Control, Janet Jackson tries something pop rarely attempts. She asks the dance floor to carry ideas. Janet Jackson's Rhythm Nation 1814 isn't just an album, it's an operating system. Across 3 calendar years, 1989, 1990, 1991, it dispatches #1 singles. The only album in chart history to do that, and it ultimately launches 7 top, 5 Hot 100 hits from a single LP, a feat still unmatched. This nation is built in Minneapolis, inside the Flyte Tyme compound. The hum of drum machines, the metallic snap of snares, and the supervisory calm of Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. The palette is industrial, clang and hiss, but the intention is civic. Jackson, Jam and Lewis thread real headlines through the grooves. State of the world name checks homelessness and unemployment. Living in a world they didn't make is written in the shadow of the 1989 Stockton schoolyard shooting. The Library of Congress would later enshrine the album for its vision of social consciousness fused with pop. The Library of Congress would later enshrine the album for its vision of social consciousness fused with pop. Visually, Janet chooses militancy with warmth. Dominic Sena directs a 30-minute black-and-white film, Rhythm Nation 1814, that treats videos like chapters in a manifesto. Knowledge, Miss You Much, Rhythm Nation. The long form wins a Grammy. The short form grammar becomes pop lingua franca. Inside that film is the now mythic chair routine from Miss You Much, conceived with choreographer Anthony Bam Thomas. Chic minimalism turned into kinetic weaponry. Even the album title is layered. 1814 has circulated with twin meanings. The year the Star-Spangled Banner was pinned and, in cipher, R equals 18, N equals 14, the initials of the nation she's imagined. The point isn't a puzzle, it's intent. This is pop about belonging, a flag stitched out of snares and slogans. Then there's the road. In 1990, the Rhythm Nation World Tour detonates the ceiling for a debut trek. Military Precision with Human Pulse, a production that critics and peers would chase for decades. Contemporary tallies routinely cite it as the most successful debut tour of its time. The show's design, monochrome uniforms, platoon-tight choreography, precision camera blocking, becomes a template for arena pop from the 90s through K-pop's synchronized brigades. Behind the gates, the business catches up with the art. In 1991, Virgin Records makes a $32 million bet on Janet Jackson. At that moment, pop's richest recording deal. 5 years later, they renegotiate at an even higher altitude. An $80 million pact that formalizes what the music was already saying. The artist is in charge. The record's power is also in its contradictions. All Right is Throwback Joy, a 1930s/1950s MGM fever dream. Directed by Julian Temple with cameos from Cab Calloway, the Nicholas Brothers, and Sid Charisse. Yet it sits perfectly alongside the metallic stomp of Rhythm Nation. The message, Black modernity contains multitudes. Rhythm Nation's most startling microstory is Black Cat. Janet writes it herself, start to finish, and produces it with Jellybean Johnson, a hard rock strafing run about self-destruction. That barrels to #1 and earns her a Grammy nod for Best Female Rock Vocal. By the early 90s, she's the rare artist with Grammy recognition across pop, R&B, dance, and rock. A map of how thoroughly she's redrawn the genre borders. And Love Will Never Do Without You has its own secret. Jam and Lewis first imagined it as a duet with a male singer. In early takes, they had Janet sing part of it in a lower register to mimic the other voice. Herb Ritts then films a sun-drenched, minimalist clip. Antonio Sabato Jr., Jimin Hoon Soo, Denim and Wind, that flips her image. From militant commander to effortless sensuality. The single goes to #1 in January 91, the third calendar year crowned by this album. The culture keeps answering back. In 2022, a Microsoft engineer recounts a quirk from the mid-2000s. Playing Rhythm Nation, near certain laptops could crash their spinning hard drives by hitting a resonant frequency. It's a parable as much as a fun fact. The song literally rattled hardware. Power brokers notice. In 1990, Janet becomes the first woman ever nominated for the Grammy. Producer of the Year, non-classical, the Academy formally recognizing that the person in the visor isn't just interpreting ideas, she's making them. And because nations have allies, there's family. In 1995, Janet and Michael detonate Scream, a futurist blast aimed at tabloid siege. Produced with Jam and Lewis and launched with a video that sets a Guinness record for cost and scale. Director Mark Romanek will later quibble with the most expensive ever label. But the myth fits the moment. Two siblings building a gravity-free panic room. Step back and the shape is clear. Control was a declaration. Rhythm Nation is statecraft, policy written in 16th notes. Its choreography taught stages to march, its singles rewired radio. Its visuals made uniform into fashion, and its business deals proved authorship could be contractual as well as creative. A pop album became a civic project, and Janet Jackson, composer, producer, architect, didn't just found a nation. She taught the rest of pop how to live in it. Between world tours and the mathematics of chart records, Janet Jackson walked onto a film set to do something deliberately smaller. John Singleton's Poetic Justice asked the most famous pop star in America to shed the armor. Box braids tucked under a newsboy cap, a hairstylist's shift, grief written in first drafts, and Maya Angelou's poems doing the underlining. The role wasn't built for spectacle. It was built for interior life, a camera that lingers instead of shouts. Singleton had a method for that intimacy. He wanted Janet to look and feel like a South Central homegirl. So the look, those era-defining Poetic Justice braids, came from collaboration. He's recalled pulling in dancer Jossie Harris and choreographer Fatima Robinson as references, with Harris's own braids inspiring Justice's now iconic style. What began as specificity became archetype. By the mid-90s, box braids were colloquially renamed for Janet's character, a pop culture shortcut for beauty with backbone. Over a tight close-up of Janet in the mirror scene, the set carried its own legends. One day, Maya Angelou, who wrote Justice's poems and appears on camera, found a young Tupac Shakur spiraling between takes and turned the moment into a teachable silence, reminding him he was a prince, that people had endured so he could be here. The temperature dropped, the work deepened. It's the kind of on-set folklore productions trade in hushed tones, except this one is documented. Angelou's presence didn't just annotate the script, it recalibrated the room. Poetic Justice is Singleton's softness after the thunder of Boys in the Hood, a coming-of-age road movie about a guarded young woman who learns to trust her voice again. Critics argued about tone. Audiences found a touchstone, quiet, tender, defiantly black.
I want people to know that they're not alone, because I wanted it to appeal.
Janet's performance helped shift how mainstream films framed black women's interior lives in the early 90s. Less message moment, more oxygen. Music swells, then the end credits roll, and the film hands the mic back to Janet. Again, is so plain spoken it glows. Jam and Lewis building a melody that moves like a confession. Janet writing the lyric as if she's whispering it to herself. The Academy noticed. Again received an Oscar nomination for Best Original Song, validating what fans already knew. The ache was unarguable. It wouldn't appear on the film's soundtrack, but it would anchor her next album. Around the same time, the tabloids chased another story, the infamous AIDS test. Rumor that Janet required Tupac to be tested before a romantic scene. Years later, Singleton said it out loud. The bit started as a joke, his joke, then escaped its cage and grew teeth in the media. It's a footnote now, but it's instructive. Mythology can overrun the work. The work, when it's this good, keeps outrunning the myth. Title card, May 1993, and then a full-stop pivot, Janet, with a period. Where Rhythm Nation marched, Janet exhaled. It was liberation in lowercase, ownership set to warmth, live bass, humid keyboards, breath at the front of the mic. The lead single, That's the Way Love Goes, drifts in like sunlight through blinds, an all-time Janet groove that spent 8 weeks at #1 on the Hot 100, her longest-running #1. The track's backbone nods to James Brown, Papa Don't Take No Mess, and opens the door to a whole record about pleasure as agency, not accessory. B-roll, loft party video set, on camera, that ease felt communal. Renee Elizondo Jr. directed the Love Goes video in a single-room hang. Janet, friends, shy laughter, where a then-unknown dancer named Jennifer Lopez breaks frame for a second and steals a glance we all remember now. It's a 3-minute mission statement. Sensuality without spectacle, intimacy as choreography. The visuals around Janet redrew her silhouette. That Rolling Stone cover, hands, Renee's, cupping her bare chest, shot by Patrick DeMarchelier, became the album's cropped artwork and a declaration. This wasn't provocation for provocation's sake. It was authorship. A black woman saying, I get to narrate my body. The record's architecture made the point over and over. Between songs, interludes threaded a narrative, snatches of dialogue, sighs, a giggle that turned sequencing into storytelling. The thesis wasn't coy. Desire is not a subplot. It's a central character. Critics later credited Janet with resetting the dial for black female pop, making room for frankness that wasn't framed as scandal, mapping a route others would walk for decades. Cut to If, live clip, monitors flickering. When the record did go hard, it was surgical. If is desire weaponized, industrial guitars, new jack swing and spike heels, and the video, Dominic Sena directing, Tina Landon drilling the choreography, invented a cyberclub grammar every pop star would borrow. Months later, it took home Best Female Video at the VMAs, not because it was loud, but because it was precise. What's remarkable is how Poetic Justice and Janet talked to each other across 1993. Justice's guardedness, the way she watches a room from behind her fringe, meets the album's invitation to breathe. The film asks her to access grief.
And I didn't feel the pain. One of the crew guys said, "So you hit yourself, are you okay?"
The record asks her to own joy. Together, they mark a pivot from militancy to intimacy, from megaphone to close mic. It's not a retreat, it's a widening. Supercut, braids on red carpets, in dorm photos, in salon mood boards, culture absorbed the clues. For many black women, those braids were less a trend than permission slip. Protective styling suddenly centered as glamour in a major studio film. Beauty editors have spent the decades since tracing the look's lineage. But everyone knows the shorthand, Poetic Justice braids. The style outlived the movie because it felt lived in. It belonged to people before it belonged to pop. Studio photos, Jam and Lewis at the board. Underneath the headlines, the little studio stories kept stacking. Jam and Lewis have said, again, began as melody on a piano, a simple sketch for a film's closing credits that Janet wrote into a memory. Love Goes floated for weeks as a half-finished idea before the room found its pocket. Once it did, Virgin even played release date shell games to keep leaks at bay, then watched radio bend toward warmth as the single caught fire. The macro arc is famous, the micro is the point. What we remember as inevitability was, in the room, 100 small choices toward ease. By year's end, the dataset was simple. Janet Jackson had carried a quiet, grieving character on her back, sung a ballad into the Oscars, then built an album that treated a black woman's sensual life as newsworthy on its own terms. If control was the door slamming and a new one opening, Janet is what happens when you walk through and start furnishing the place. Plants in the window, light pooling on the floor, a record spinning slow. The nation builder had become a world builder, and the world, for once, felt like hers. By 1997, the Safe Career move would have been a greatest hits tour and a few more frictionless bangers. Instead, Janet pulls the room lights low and lets us hear the hum that had been under the surface for years. The velvet rope isn't a victory lap, it's an intake of breath. She frames the record as an invitation past the rope, an inspection of the self when the show is over. And crucially, she says out loud what many artists only imply: depression, shame, desire, the tug-of-war between autonomy and intimacy. It is a pop star placing therapy on the track sheet. Critics will later call it her most daring album. Janet will call it her most personal. The music reflects that choice. With Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, she doesn't chase the era's neon trends so much as absorb them into a private palette. Slivers of trip-hop and drum-and-bass jittering under warm R&B. Synths that sigh, snares that whisper before they snap. Empty sketches the eeriness of early online romance years before social media would turn longing into a design feature. Free Zone imagines a dance floor commons where homophobia has no currency. And on a cover of Tonight's the Night, she keeps the gendered girl intact, a small, defiant pronoun that told queer fans they were seen in 1997's pop mainstream. The first single behaves like a thesis statement and an anti-single at the same time. Got Till It's Gone, built around Joni Mitchell's Big Yellow Taxi, and a murmured verse from Q-Tip, is a mid-tempo drift more interested in afterglow than chart conquest. Mark Romanek's video answers with a miniature film, a black bohemian salon rendered like a lost reel from apartheid-era South Africa, wide lapel futurism, Polaroid textures, and the kind of communal ease that reads as resistance. It doesn't even arrive as a commercial US single, but the clip takes the Grammys anyway. The point lands. On Velvet Rope, the visuals are not packaging, they're exegesis. And then there's the song that turns elegy into Whether You Can Dance In. Together Again begins as a private grief, friends lost too soon, a fan's letter about a father gone, before Jam, Lewis, and Janet recast it as a motoric disco sunrise. The refrain is uncomplicated on purpose, the moral isn't. She routes proceeds to AIDS organizations, including AMFAR, and takes the song to #1 while refusing to treat joy as amnesia. The glitter doesn't erase the absence, it throws light on what's missing. For all the whispers about difficult material, the audience shows up. The album debuts at #1 in the US, then keeps yielding music that works in multiple climates. The Blackstreet-assisted I Get Lonely TNT remix functions as a baton pass between Teddy Riley's New Jack Swing and Timbaland's late 90s syncopations. Go Deep becomes a club chart staple thanks to the era's elite house remixers. The larger signal is that Janet can scale intimacy. She can make a record about repair and still make arenas jump. On stage, the ideas get bodies. The Velvet Rope tour arrives as autobiography with a budget. A giant storybook stage devised to open on her life, a show that moves from funhouse pop to explicit reckoning. During What About, she stages domestic violence as choreography, screams, shoves, a final act of refusal, turning a deep-cut album track into a communal exhale. Rope Burn pushes consent and kink into the center of an arena, as a selected fan is strapped, safely, into the chair while Janet writes the politics of power exchange across negative space. When HBO films the Madison Square Garden date, the special draws more than 15 million viewers and wins an Emmy for its technical wizardry. The message is unmistakable. The arena show itself can be a language for vulnerability. Between singles, remixes, and tour, a few quiet footnotes tell the fuller story. She personally asked Joni Mitchell for that sample, a bridge between two diarists. The Together Again, deeper remix returns the hit to its original ballad form, underscoring that the euphoria was a production choice, not an emotional dodge. House legends, Frankie Knuckles, David Morales, masters at work, recontextualize Velvet Rope for late-night sanctuaries. Proof that an album about loneliness can also score belonging. And in interviews around the tour, Janet says the subtext out loud. Making this record helped her like herself. The art was the instrument. Look around contemporary pop and you still see the album's fingerprints. Artists using a blockbuster platform to deliver a dark or confessional turn. Stadium productions that pause the fireworks to stage a trauma. Choreography that treats kink and care with the same seriousness as a chorus line. But in 1997, this wasn't a template. It was a leap. The Velvet Rope proposes that repair isn't a neat arc, but a practice, done in rooms with microphones and rooms with friends, on dance floors and in daylight. Janet didn't close the book at the rope. She invited us through it, then showed us how to live on the other side. February 1st, 2004. The NFL's biggest stage becomes a morality play. A split-second wardrobe mishap at the Super Bowl halftime show detonates into a weeks-long national panic. The FCC slaps CBS with a record indecency fine. Years of litigation follow. And in 2011, a federal appeals court finally voids the penalty. What lingered longer than the law, though, were the optics and the unequal distribution of blame. A New York Times-produced documentary 2 decades later would argue that the outrage told us more about American culture, race, gender, and power than it did about one performer or one accidental second of live TV. The aftershocks were measurable. Industry reporting and later investigations describe how Viacom properties, MTV, VH1, and radio, moved to sideline Janet's new music in the immediate wake. The Grammys rescinded her invitation that same week. None of that could be proven in a single ledger line, but the pattern is clear enough to chart. A cooling of airplay and opportunity around one of pop's defining architects. Meanwhile, the man who shared the stage returned to the Super Bowl years later. His public apology to Janet would not arrive until 2021. The documentary Malfunction revisits that disparity, naming the people and companies who helped calcify it. And then, slowly, the work speaks for itself again. In 2015, Unbreakable arrives like a familiar pulse, Jam and Lewis back in the room. The Rhythm Nation production philosophy modernized rather than embalmed. It isn't nostalgia, it's craft. The album debuts at #1 on the Billboard 200, her 7th chart topper, via a new, canny partnership with BMG under her own Rhythm Nation imprint. The lead single, No Sleep, floats in on Quiet Storm Haze and settles at the top of adult R&B airplay for weeks. A grown-in, still curious Janet reminding radio how effortlessly she can set a temperature. Life reroutes. In 2017, she gives birth to her son, Isa. Within months, she separates from her husband, Wissam Almana. When the postponed tour reemerges as State of the World, it's not just a resumption, it's a brief. The show's opening reel calls out white supremacy and police violence by name. The setlist resurrects The Knowledge and What About, songs that always were manifestos but now read as dispatches. In the arena, she's doing what she's done since Rhythm Nation, turning choreography into argument, turning pop memory into citizen action. The halls catch up to the ledger. In 2018, she steps onto the Billboard Music Awards stage for a career-spanning medley and the Icon Award, a television masterclass in camera sense from the very person who taught a generation how to face one. A year later, Janelle Monáe inducts Janet into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, making official what dancers, directors, and pop architects had long since treated as fact. The blueprint lives here. Then comes the victory lap that doesn't feel like one. In 2023, she launches the Together Again tour, an intergenerational summit disguised as a set list, and posts the highest-grossing tour of her career to date. New North American legs roll through 2024. By 2025, she's anchoring a Las Vegas residency and extending dates on demand. The machine she built, live band locked to digital precision, choreography that moves like punctuation, still scales, still sells, still translates. The machine she built, live band locked to digital precision, choreography that moves like punctuation, still scales, still sells, still translates. May 2025 offers a neat bit of symmetry. On live network TV, the same medium that once made her a symbol for something she didn't do, Janet accepts the American Music Awards icon trophy. I don't consider myself an icon, she says, and then performs like someone who has never needed the word. This is the paradox embedded in her catalog, relentless authorship without self-mythologizing. The personal chapter runs parallel. The London school runs, the deliberate privacy around her son, the recalibrated life. But the public work is louder. Watch how Unbreakable folds grief and resilience into Jam and Lewis's warm circuitry. How State of the World retools old manifestos for new headlines. How Together Again stitches 3 decades of vocabulary into one evening. By any measurable metric, #1 albums, arena economies, the grammar of modern performance, Janet Jackson remains what she was the day Control hit. The author of her own image, the choreographer of her fate. The camera finds the face of someone who learned to speak under lights, and then taught the room to listen.